It's hard to believe, but we are now over halfway through the 2023 NFL season. That's right. Week 9 is now in the books. And you know what that means? It's time for Sports Ball Network's NFL Week 9 breakdown. The Pittsburgh Steelers, despite all odds, kicked off this NFL week with a 20-16 win over the Tennessee Titans on Thursday Night Football. Steelers now 5-3, just keep finding ways to win, mostly through a very, very good defense. Of course, that's not to say that Pittsburgh's offense doesn't have talent either. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, even Kenny Pickett are all pretty talented players. But with Matt Canada running the show, that talent is severely wasted. Still, 5-3 is 5-3, and right now, if the season ended today, Pittsburgh would be in the playoffs. Actually, every single AFC North team would be in the playoffs, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But I digress. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the takeaway for Pittsburgh is that they won, and they will continue to do so because they are a well run, well coached franchise with a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, even if some of that talent is being severely underutilized. Tennessee, on the other hand, fell to 3-5. Rookie quarterback Will Levis came back down to earth with a 262-yard interception performance on 22 of 39 passing. Derrick Henry had 75 yards and a touchdown, but he was not able to will the Titans to a win here. Uh, Tennessee is not playing for this year. I think everybody kind of knows that at this point. And with the announcement that Will Levis is the starter moving forward, that really is only solidified. Tennessee at this point is looking to see what they have and build for the future, which is something that we predicted would happen weeks ago here on the channel. But it's only with this loss that we're really starting to see that plan of action begin to take shape. The NFL kicked things off early Sunday in Germany as the Kansas City Chiefs got off to a hot start and then were able to fend off the Miami Dolphins in a 21-14 victory. Kansas City did just enough, and so did quarterback Patrick Mahomes. He was 20 for 30 for 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. But really, the story here is Miami. Miami, when they have played winning teams, has gone 0-3, losing to Buffalo, losing to Philadelphia, and losing to Kansas City. Every other team that the Dolphins have played this year have been 500 or worse, and they have gone 6-0 against them. I said a couple weeks ago that Miami just seems like a team that's able to beat bad squads, but is unable to get over the hump and beat good teams. And we've now seen that happen 3 times here. It really makes you wonder how high this team's ceiling really is. And this is a team that scored 70 points in a game. Kind of crazy to think about. Kansas City, meanwhile, did just enough, as I mentioned earlier, but it was mostly because of their defense that they were able to win this game. This defense held that Miami Dolphins team that scored 70 points earlier this season to only 14 points. This Kansas City defense is legitimate. It feels like a top 5 unit. It is a top 5 unit. And honestly, this might be the best supporting cast on that side of the ball that Patrick Mahomes has ever had. If Kansas City is able to resolve some of the bumps and issues they have on the offensive side of the ball now, who knows what's going to happen? Kicking off the afternoon, the Minnesota Vikings had a second half comeback over the Atlanta Falcons, moving to 5-4 on the year with a 31-28 victory. Let's talk about Minnesota first. Josh Dobbs was efficient in this game. He threw for 158 yards on 2 touchdowns. He had a 2-point conversion and he ran for 66 yards and a score. He played inspired football and rallied the team around him when they needed it most. Vikings could have easily thrown in the towel on this season, and at least for part of this game, it looked like they did. But Josh Dobbs and the team eventually rallied, and now they're 5-4 and firmly in contention for the playoffs, possibly the NFC North should Detroit slip. It's actually quite inspiring to see, and I, for one, am excited to see what the Vikings are able to do in the future. What I am not excited to see in the future, though, is the Atlanta Falcons, who fell to 4-5. Arthur Smith continues to make strange decisions, to say the least, as he seemingly refused to get the ball into either Bijan Robinson or Kyle Pitts' hands once again. At this point, I can't help but wonder if this is self sabotage. Arthur Smith has seemingly refused throughout his entire coaching career in Atlanta to not only get the ball in the hands of his playmakers, but to acknowledge that they're even on the team. What's worse is that whenever the media or fans question him, instead of answering those questions or explaining himself properly, Arthur Smith instead lashes out at the media and the fans and basically says that he's smarter than everyone else. Honestly, Arthur Smith is not one of the most likable guys in the NFL, and he's rubbing a lot of people the wrong way now. It was not as bad when he was winning, but now Atlanta's losing a lot, and really in embarrassing fashion. At this point, one has to wonder how much longer Arthur Smith is going to be able to keep that headset on. And if I'm being frank, a loss to the Arizona Cardinals next week might just be the catalyst for some major changes down in Georgia. The Baltimore Ravens embarrassed the Seattle Seahawks, winning 37-3. And honestly, there's really not much to say about this game. Baltimore at 7-2 is one of the best teams in the AFC. They are on top of the conference, tied with Kansas City. As long as Lamar Jackson continues to play inspired football like he has been, they will continue to do so. Of course, that comes with the caveat that everyone else in Baltimore's division is also playing inspired football and that they absolutely cannot slip up here. But still, Baltimore looks great, and there's really no complaints from me here. For Seattle, this is again a game you want to forget, and it only highlighted that Geno Smith has regressed from the previous season. He was 13 for 28 for 157 yards and an interception. And as their quarterback regressed, so did the rest of the team. Seattle only managed 24 yards on the ground between their running backs, and really the whole team itself just looked absolutely outclassed. Seattle basically has shown us this season that they are a good team and that they can win tough games, such as their win in Detroit. But more likely than not, they are not going to be able to compete with these top teams in either conference, which of course is not good for their playoff hopes, but that's a story for another day. There was a shutout up in Cleveland as the Browns took it to the Arizona Cardinals, winning 27-0. Quarterback Deshaun Watson finally got back on the field and was efficient on this day. He went 19 for 30 for 219 yards and 2 touchdowns. Cleveland was relatively efficient on the ground. Jerome Ford had 44 yards. Kareem Hunt had 38 and a touchdown. And on defense, the Browns were absolutely dominant. They had 2 interceptions and 7 sacks. It was pretty much a flawless game from Cleveland, and they beat up on a team that they absolutely should have. They are now 5-3, firmly in the AFC North and playoff hunt, and project to be a team that could make a really deep postseason run if everything goes right. As for Arizona, it was a day that they want to forget. Rookie quarterback Clayton Tune went 11 for 20 for only 58 yards and those 2 interceptions. Arizona's 2 running backs had 10 yards on the ground, and really this team is hurting right now. Luckily for them, star quarterback Kyler Murray is expected to come back next week, and against a reeling Falcons team, The Arizona Cardinals could potentially bounce back here in a major, major way. Without quarterback Matthew Stafford, the Los Angeles Rams struggled as they fell to the Green Bay Packers 22-3. In fact, the team struggled so much that they have now signed quarterback Carson Wentz to a deal. And really, that tells you all you need to know about the state of the Rams right now. The team had 51 yards on the ground between Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman. Cooper Kupp was the leading receiver with 48 yards and only 2 receptions on 7 targets. And the defense allowed 20 points to a Packers offense that has been struggling for the past few weeks. Speaking of those Packers, they had a bit of a bounce back here, and quarterback Jordan Love, after struggling for much of the season, had a pretty efficient game, going 20 for 26 for 228 yards and a touchdown. The Packers defense, of course, was the star of the show. They had an interception, a sack, and did not allow a lot of yardage to a Rams team that came into this game more than likely looking to win to keep their playoff hopes alive. Green Bay moves to 3-5, and although they are unlikely to make the playoffs in the NFC at this point, anything is technically possible. And with Seattle reeling a bit and Minnesota still in a very tenuous position, if Green Bay goes on a bit of a run, they could find themselves potentially competing for a wild card spot. But more than likely, as was expected for this season, the Packers will likely look at this as a rebuilding year and continue to evaluate their young quarterback to see if he can be their signal caller of the future. The Houston Texans won a thrilling shootout against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 39-37. And really, the only takeaway from this game is that CJ Stroud is absolutely amazing at football. The rookie signal caller set a record throwing for 470 yards and 5 touchdowns, in addition to a 2-point conversion. He absolutely is a franchise quarterback at this point. You can just tell through these first 9 weeks, he has the moxie, he has the grit, he has the work ethic, and he has the talent. Houston has a keeper here, and at 4-4, they could be an interesting team down the stretch because of it. For Tampa Bay, they do fall to 3-5, though the team pretty much did everything they could to win. Baker Mayfield was efficient, 265 yards and 2 touchdowns. Shad White had 2 touchdowns on the ground, and really, there's not much Tampa Bay could have done against CJ Stroud. He's just really, 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 really good at football. That being said, Bucs fans, do not lose hope yet. The best team in the NFC South is the 5-4 Saints, who have struggled for large parts of the season on offense. So, hey, there's still hope that you can win your division and potentially make the playoffs, especially considering that this Buccaneers team beat that Saints team earlier this year. And if the record was tied between these teams, they would have the tiebreaker. The Washington Commanders did just enough in this game to outwit Bill Belichick and his defensive schemes, beating the Patriots 20-17 and moving to 4-5 on the season, keeping their playoff hopes alive. Quarterback Sam Howell continues to show that he has something here and that he could be a potential franchise signal caller for Washington, throwing for 325 yards and a touchdown on 29 for 45 passing. Of course, Sam Howell also threw an interception in this game, but considering that he was going up against the greatest defensive mastermind the NFL has ever seen, who is notorious for making young quarterbacks struggle, I'd say he had a pretty good outing. Actually, I'd say Washington as a whole had a pretty good outing on offense, as the run game also was mostly able to get going. Brian Robinson ran for 63 yards and a score. Antonio Gibson was efficient, running for 34 yards on only 6 carries. And really, Washington just proved that they were a more talented team this day. As for New England, Quarterback Mac Jones was up and down in this game. He threw for 220 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And ultimately, he was unable to do enough to beat Washington. And really, the takeaway here is that no matter how talented you are on defense, no matter how good your scheme is, no matter how good your coach is, if you can't move the ball and if you can't really do much on offense, much like the Patriots are unable to do, then you're not going to win that many games in this league. It's unfortunate, but that's the truth. Sorry, Patriots fans. At least you have 2024 to look forward to. The New Orleans Saints ended up beating the Chicago Bears 24-17 to move to 5-4 on the year. And this game has to be encouraging if you're a Saints fan. Despite the struggles as of late for New Orleans on the offensive side of the ball, they had been leading the division. And now, after this game, there's some hope for the Saints offense. Quarterback Derek Carr went for 211 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was efficient. Chris Olave started getting involved again. He had 6 receptions for 46 yards and a touchdown. And really, Taysom Hill, the Swiss Army knife of football, showed just how dominant he could be. He threw for a 3-yard touchdown. He had 11 carries for 52 yards. He had 4 receptions for 13 yards and touchdown as well. The defense for New Orleans also had a very good performance. They had 3 interceptions and 2 sacks. And really, this team just proved to me why they are the one to beat in the NFC South. For Chicago, rookie quarterback Tyson Bagent had an okay day. He threw for 220 yards. He did have 3 interceptions, but he also had 2 touchdowns, both of which went to star tight end Cole Kmet, who had 6 receptions for 55 yards and those 2 scores. Darnell Mooney had a surprisingly good game. He had 5 receptions for 82 yards. DJ Moore was relatively quiet, 3 for 44. And ultimately, Chicago just did not have enough to win this game. Hopefully for the Bears, Justin Fields will be able to come back in a couple weeks so they can continue to evaluate him, because that is the single most important thing that this team needs to do this year. Given that the Bears are likely to have 2 top 5 picks, they could realistically have their choice of quarterback in this upcoming draft. So they need to know if Justin Fields is the answer or not. The late afternoon slate of games kicked off with the Indianapolis Colts moving to 4-5 after their 27-13 victory over the 1-7 Carolina Panthers. Let's talk about the Panthers first. Rookie quarterback Bryce Young, coming off of the best game of his young career, subsequently had one of the worst games of his young career, throwing for 173 yards and 3 interceptions against a very tough Colts defense. Honestly, these types of rookie up and downs are to be expected from Bryce, but it never feels good to see them, especially given that CJ Stroud has absolutely dominated the league so far. Uh, really, though, Bryce has shown flashes, and it's not all of his fault. He has a lackluster supporting cast in Carolina. And the off-season priority for this team is going to have to be to improve that. As for Indianapolis, they continue to remain somewhat relevant in the AFC wildcard race. Gardner Minshew was all right this game. He didn't really need to do much. He only threw for 127 yards and a touchdown. Really, the Colts as a whole did not need to do much. The Panthers more or less beat themselves in this game. And really, that's all you need to know here. The Colts did not do enough necessarily to win the game, but they also did not necessarily do enough to lose the game either. And it shows that while this team does have some talent, they might not have enough to compete with the top dogs quite yet. But still, has to be encouraging to see the positive direction that the Indianapolis franchise is going in right now. And once they get Anthony Richardson back next year, those steps should only continue. The New York Giants look like perhaps the worst team in football as they fell to the Las Vegas Raiders 30-6. Really, I can't help but feel a little bit bad for those New York Giants fans as they have suffered through injuries and poor play all year long. The latest of which is Daniel Jones' ACL tear, which has taken him out for the year and could possibly end an era here in New York. The Giants are likely to get a top five pick, and with a great rookie quarterback class for this year, we could look to move in another direction. If they do, it will be sad, but ultimately a move that I understand. The Raiders, without Coach Josh McDaniels on the sideline, absolutely exploded. They had a great game. Rookie Aiden O'Connell did enough. He threw for 209 yards. Josh Jacobs had 98 yards and 2 touchdowns on the grounds, and the defense had 8 sacks and 2 interceptions. If this is how the Raiders are going to play moving forward, they could go on a late season run. Of course, they were playing the Giants and they had a interim coach in his first week. So with more tape on this team and how they're going to play moving forward, I expect them to struggle a bit more, but still very, very, very encouraging for this squad. For 59 minutes, everything was calm and dandy here in Philadelphia. And then in the final minute, I hit the proverbial panic button as the Philadelphia Eagles nearly imploded on themselves and almost lost to the Dallas Cowboys. Luckily for me and my sanity, though, my Philadelphia Eagles were able to pull out this win and move to 8-1 as they beat Dallas 28-23. Jalen Hurts was great as always, throwing for 207 yards and 2 touchdowns to go along with 36 yards and a touchdown on the ground. The Eagles were efficient running the ball overall. DeAndre Swift had 43 yards. Gainwell had 22 and a touchdown. And the defense, despite seemingly giving up yards by the handful at the end of the game, did just enough with 5 sacks to win the game. Philadelphia has, for the most part, won ugly this season, and although it's not the greatest thing in the world for me to see them doing this so frequently, a win is a win, and this team is 8-1, and perhaps could break the NFC East curse of never having a back-to-back division title winner. Really, though, Philadelphia does need to tighten things up here, and there's a lot that this team can improve on as we get closer towards the postseason. But as it looks right now, the Eagles are the number one seed in the NFC. As for Dallas, they had a real chance to come back and win this game, but Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott made a couple questionable decisions, to say the least, at the end, particularly in the final 10 seconds where they did not spike the ball and instead opted to try and run a play. It was interesting to see that strategy. Ultimately, there was not a lot of harm in it as the Cowboys did not lose too much time and probably would have ran the same amount of plays in those final 10 seconds that they could have run if they spiked the ball, but they definitely took the less safe option there. Of course, this is what Dallas does every year, and this is ultimately why they will never win in the playoffs or really make the Super Bowl so long as Mike McCarthy is running the show here. But I digress. Dallas showed that it was a good team and could compete with the top dogs in the NFC in Philadelphia, San Francisco, Detroit, but ultimately they fell short this week. Moving on. The Sunday night football game between the Cincinnati Bengals and the Buffalo Bills was exciting, but ultimately it was Cincinnati who came out on top, winning 24-18. It's a bit concerning if you're a Buffalo fan to see the Buffalo offense start so slow, so frequently this year. And Josh Allen, up until really the final quarter of this game, was mostly struggling. He ended up with 258 yards, a touchdown, and a 2-point conversion in the air, as well as an interception, to go along with 44 yards and a touchdown on the ground. And as we've seen for the past few years, when Josh Allen struggles, this Buffalo team struggles. And now at 5-4, Buffalo is out of the playoffs. As all three AFC North teams that are not named the Baltimore Ravens are in the wild card spots right now. Kind of crazy to think about, but that's true. For Buffalo, there is a silver lining here, though. Rookie tight end Dalton Kincaid continues to impress. He had 10 receptions for 81 yards. And really, this is what Buffalo was hoping for when they drafted him, a true bona fide second option aside from Stephon Diggs for their quarterback to throw to. So there's that. As for Cincinnati, after a really slow start to this season, this team has really heated up. They are 5-3, and Joe Burrow was fantastic. He threw for 348 yards and 2 touchdowns. Joe Mixon added 37 and a touchdown on the ground, and the Cincinnati defense continues to play efficient football. The Bengals at the beginning of the year did not look like a team that was ready to make a deep postseason run like they have the past couple years. But I think at this point we can firmly put those concerns to rest. And I think we need to realize that this team is just really, really good and will continue to be good as long as they are coached by Zach Taylor and quarterbacked by Joe Burrow. The New York Jets and the Los Angeles Chargers wrapped up this week on Monday Night Football in what appears to be a defensive battle despite the score. The Chargers, of course, won 27-6, moving to 4-4. But quarterback Justin Herbert only threw for 136 yards, and Austin Eckler, despite running for 2 touchdowns, only ran for 47. There was not a lot of offense in this game, and really it was the Los Angeles Chargers defense that carried the day here for the team, getting a whopping 8 sacks. Of course, the New York Jets defense was not too far behind with 5 sacks of their own, but they are considered a very good defensive team. Los Angeles is not. So it was really, really surprising to see them basically terrorize Zach Wilson and the New York Jets offense all night long. Still, they did what they had to do, and the Chargers, now 4-4, are firmly in the wild card hunt in the AFC. And given that they have a star quarterback and a lot of talent on this team, I would not be surprised if Los Angeles ends up with one of those wild card spots by the end of the season. Speaking of talented teams and star quarterbacks, the Jets fell to 4-4, but that does not mean their playoff hopes are gone yet. They still have a top 5 defense, some decent talent on the offense with Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, and perhaps could get Aaron Rodgers back late in the season for a playoff push. This loss, of course, is not great, but that does not mean it's the end of the world. Thank you so much for watching the Sports Ball Network's Week 9 NFL breakdown. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and leave a like on the video, and we'll catch you in the next one.